Logic is a branch of philosophy. It is a study of the laws of thinking. The development of logic has gone through three stages: figurative logic, abstract logic, and symmetrical logic, in which figurative logic and abstract logic are unified. Logic is the study of thinking. All thinking has both content and form aspects. The content of thinking refers to the object and its attributes reflected by the thinking. The form of thinking refers to the different ways of reflecting the object and its attributes, that is, the different ways of expressing the content of thinking. From a logical point of view, the three basic forms of abstract thinking are concepts, propositions, and reasoning. The word logic originates from the Greek word logos, which has a variety of translations, such as reason, discourse, or language. Logic is traditionally defined as the study of the laws of thought or correct reasoning. This is usually understood in terms of inferences or arguments. Reasoning may be seen as the activity of drawing inferences, whose outward expression is given in arguments. An inference or an argument is a set of premises together with a conclusion. Logic is interested in whether arguments are good or inferences are valid, whether the premises support their conclusions. Logic has broad and narrow senses. Logic in the narrow sense refers to the science of reasoning, that is, the science that only studies how to infer the conclusion from the premises. Logic in a broad sense refers to the science that studies the form of thinking, the laws of thinking, and the logical method of thinking. The scope of general logic research is relatively large. It is a traditional understanding, and it has a lot to do with philosophical research. The system of the entire logic discipline is very large and complex, such as traditional, modern and dialectical, deductive, inductive and analogical, classical and non-classical, and so on. However, no matter how complex it is, it still has some similarities, such as the method of constructing judgment, the reasoning of necessity, the identification of logical truth or logical law, and so on. Logic as a science of logic is both old and young. It has a long history. It has three major sources: the formal logic of ancient Greece, the logic of pre-Chinese debate in China, and the reasoning of ancient India. Logic is a fundamental discipline, and the basic theory of logic is the principles and methods generally applicable to other disciplines. At the same time, logic is an instrumental subject, which provides tools for logical analysis, logical criticism, logical reasoning, and logical argumentation for all sciences, including basic subjects. Logic is called in science of reasoning, so there is no doubt that the study of logic cannot be separated from reasoning, and reasoning can be simply divided into two forms: deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning.
Next, let me give a brief introduction to reasoning. First, let me give an example for a simple illustration. There are three circles, A, B, and C, and there are three groups of pairwise relationships. Two groups of pairwise relationships are known, and the logic is to obtain the third group of pairwise relationships through perceptual intuition. The process of logical reasoning is the process of obtaining a new category from an old category. It can be divided into two forms: deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. First of all is deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is based on general premises to deduce a conclusion for an individual or individual special situation. In most cases, what people say about logical reasoning usually means deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is the process of thinking from general to specific. A deductive argument consists of three parts: the premises, the conclusion, and the logical relationship between the premises and the conclusion. The premise is a known condition, which is the foundation of deductive reasoning. The premise reveals the general laws of things, including widespread principles, natural laws, and physical theorems. To understand the world, we need logical and rigorous deductive reasoning, and to recognize special individuals through general laws. Deductive arguments comes in many forms, the most important and common of which is the syllogistic style. Let's use that classic syllogism as an example. All people will die. Socrates is a man. Socrates will die. The reason why this classic syllogism is effective is because Socrates is already included in every people. In other words, in our initial induction, we have actually taken into account the death of Socrates, and we can get everyone will die for this reason. To judge whether a syllogism is correct and valid, it is mainly examined from two aspects. One is that the premise must be true, whether it is a major premise or a minor premise. Its content must conform to objective facts. Untrue premises lead to untrue conclusions. Second, the reasoning process should be logical, and the reasoning form should be effective. Next is inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is based on the theories of empirical things or knowledge materials, looking for the basic laws or common laws that they obey, and assuming that other things in the same kind of things also obey these laws, so as to use these laws as the basic principles for predicting other things of the same kind, a cognitive method. Deductive reasoning is narrow reasoning, while inductive reasoning is amplifying reasoning. Although there is a distinction between inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning, we should clearly see that these two complement each other. The major premises of general knowledge of deductive reasoning must be generalized from concrete empirical knowledge by means of inductive reasoning. And in these things, there is no deductive reasoning without inductive reasoning.
I will explain the difference and the connection between deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. First of all, let's take a look at the difference, mainly including the following 3 points. First one, the starting point of thinking is different. Second one, the knowledge scope of conclusion judgment is different. Last one, the premise is not the same as the result. First, the starting point of thinking is not the same. This means that when you choose a form of reasoning, it's not based on what you like, it's based on where you start. If all the information you know is individual, then you have to use the inductive reasoning. Instead, if you know that there is a pattern or objective truth in the situation, then you can use the deductive reasoning. In summary, this is the essential difference between them. Induction is from the individual to the general, and the deduction is from the general to the individual. Second, the knowledge scope of conclusion judgment is different. In induction, the inference is beyond the scope of the premises. In other words, inductive reasoning is generalization from a small scale to the larger scale, A deductive conclusion does not go beyond the premises. In other words, deductive reasoning reduces from a large scale to the small scale. The result is kind of a subset of the premises. Last one, the premise and the result of connection is not the same. This can be inferred from the second conclusion. Because induction expands the range of knowledge, there is a lot of uncertainty in randomness because much of expansion is unknown, so conclusions are not very reliable. And then of course there complete induction. That is, after all the possibilities have been enumerated, the conclusion is certain. And the deduction, because the conclusion is subset of premises, is within the knowledge of the premises. So as long as the premises are correct and the reasoning process is correct, so conclusion must be correct. So that's the distinction between induction and deduction. And now let's look at the connection between them. There are two main points. First one, the conclusion of induction provides a premise for deduction. Second one, deduction provides guidance for induction. These 2 points complement each other, and I will make a unified explanation. We said before that all deductive reasoning has to have a major premise, which is either objective fact or regular conclusions. This from induction. So as we said before, the conclusion of induction is uncertain. Wouldn't the result of a deduction be wrong if it were a premise? So when we conclude the result, we need to deduce the possible situations through deductive reasoning to see whether the result is correct. For example, there is a person who has good grade in major subject, so it's concluded that this person has good grade. But school grade in addition to major and elective, so prove that this person is a good student. You also need to look at the electives. So now we can assume that this person's grades are very good, and then we can deduce that his elective grades are also very good. If this indeed is the case, then conclusion of this generalization is correct. On the contrary, if it is not, then it means that your result of the induction is wrong. This is the deduction that provides guidance for induction. Anyway, it's in the constant cycle of induction to the deduction to the induction that we get to the final answer.